Welcome and thank you for joining us. We have one of our favorites, Pastor Siri Strommen from Atonement Lutheran Church in Bloomington, Minnesota. Welcome, Siri.
Thank you. So good to be here with you again.
Yes, I've missed you. We haven't connected in a while. And I love when Siri's on because what I try to do is tie current events in with how can we maintain a spiritual center? How can we find a way to inject positive into this? And I've talked about this before. There is a theory that we should not speak about anything negative or what we don't want. It doesn't fit for me. I feel like I need to talk about these things that are going on and then find a way to exist in a more loving, open way, not just complaining about it, but identifying it. And I think it's really important, especially for women. So what I want to talk about today is I see this trend. It's like today's most vocal Christians are using religion to justify their sexism and patriotism to justify their racism. And I found a quote by this man, Reverend Michael Corin from Toronto. And he said, Jesus came preaching peace and love, and humanity rejected him. If you don't get that, you don't get the Gospels. And it seems to me that a number of people today who complain about, this is important, who complain about how they're losing their rights to abuse others, don't get those Gospels at all. Isn't that that's a perfect turn of phrase? People are complaining because they're losing their rights to abuse others, whether it's women, gays, many other immigrants fall under that category. Before I jump in, I wanted to mention this. I'm reading a fascinating book. It's called The Magdalene Mysteries, The Left-Hand Path of the Feminine Christ. It's by Saren Bertrand, Cerenbertrand, and Azra Bertrand, Azrabertrand. I mention this book because especially Christians are so rock solid in their belief that this is what God wants, this is the way it's always been, and we're on a holy path because we're promoting this. And the fact of the matter is, it's more recent history. There's ancient history where the goddess was worshipped. Women were revered for their fertility. Their sexuality was used as a healing tool freely and openly. So if you think, I believe this because it's the way it's always been, maybe you should educate yourself a little bit more. Mm-hmm. So anyway, here's what I want to talk about. These are a few things that have been current events, topics people are discussing, and they all connect. And I'm going to talk about how I see that they connect. One is trad wives. I don't know if you've heard about that, Siri. It's traditional wives. Have you heard about that? It's a new movement. Okay, they call themselves trad wives.
Yep.
And the traditional wives, I have a quote by one of the biggest TikTok influencers, trad wives. Her name's SD Williams. Here's a quote by her. So the man goes outside the house, works, provides for the family. The woman stays home and she's the homemaker. She takes care of the home and the children if there are any. No problem with that. Good for you. If you can afford to do that, wonderful. But her definition moved beyond the idyllic character of June Cleaver, even the Victorian era presumptions of separate spheres. I'm taking this from a Time magazine article. Trad wives also believe, she insisted, that they should submit to their husbands and serve their husbands and family. She did not believe women were inferior to men, she said, but that they had an equally important but different role. I love that BS. They always throw us.
Yeah.
It's just as sacred. Okay, yeah.
Mm-hmm. If
it's just as sacred and just as important, why are you fighting so hard? Why don't you switch with us? I always think that with the men that are fighting so hard to keep women in the home and them out there, but they complain about it's so much easier. It's so hard out here. You don't want that job. You know, if you were at a company and somebody had a job that you saw as easier than yours, and you were working really hard and wanted relief from it, and the person at the easier job was like, we want your job, let's switch, you jump at it. But they're fighting to keep us in our roles. And there's a reason for that, because women do so much more work to keep society going, but we get no credit for it. And we've been well trained to believe it's our sacred duty and whatever. All right. So anyway, so that's the trad wives. Harrison Butker, I'm sure you've heard of him, the Chiefs kicker, spoke at a Catholic college commencement in Kansas, and he addressed the women graduates directly. He said a lot of really misogynistic stuff, homophobic stuff, but he's addressed the women graduates directly in an attempt to counter the most diabolical lies they have been told. So here's the diabolical lies women have been told. More than professional achievements, he said they should be excited to take on the vocation of homemaker, using his own wife, Isabel Butker, as an example. He shared that his wife's life really started when she began living her vocation as a wife and as a mother, and urged men to be unapologetic in their masculinity and to fight against the culture's emasculation of men. So the emasculation of men, my guess from what I've seen and heard whenever anyone talks about that, means they don't like that men are actually sharing feelings and taking part in keeping the home running, taking care of the children. You know, they like the John Wayne type of man, the misogynistic, sexist type of man. Okay, he also described homosexuality as a deadly sin. And when I saw that, I thought to myself, you know, it's deadly, because if homosexuals come out, a lot of times they end up dead from these kind of men who are taught that it's a deadly sin and it's their right to beat them to death.
Right.
So that's Harrison Butker. The other person we're talking about is Jerry Seinfeld, who on Barry Weiss's podcast said, "I miss dominant masculinity. Yeah, I get the toxic masculinity thing. I get it, but still, I like a real man." He also said PC culture in this extreme left is making TV comedy extinct, which I guess means you can't be funny unless you're insulting or abusing.
Right.
And
Right.
I would counter with just one name that comes to mind, and that is Nate Bargatze. I don't know if you're familiar with him. This man is incredibly funny. He's got specials on Amazon and Netflix. He just talks about life, growing up, deadpan delivery, super funny. He doesn't insult anyone. I also want to remind people, which we were well aware of 25, 30 years ago, that Jerry Seinfeld, I sound like my mother. That's what she always called him, Jerry Seinfeld, was dating a 17-year-old high school girl when he was 38 years old. And it was so accepted that magazines and newspapers covered it all the time. Shoshana Lowenstein and Jerry Seinfeld are doing this, doing that, never questioning the fact that what is a 38-year-old man doing with a 17-year-old high school girl? Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Sorry, did you want to say something?
Oh, well, you let me know when it's time.
Yeah, no, I'm not done. I'll get there. Okay. Also tied in with this, in a new federal legal complaint filed by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, 2 professors argue that if students miss school for abortion, they should have the right to fail those students because pregnancy is the result of voluntary consensual intercourse. And if you remember Representative Todd Aiken, he was the one that coined the term legitimate rape, and that women's bodies have a way of shutting that whole thing down. We have these magic bodies where if we get raped and pregnant, we can just shut it down. So, or keep it from getting pregnant. Anyway, so here's the thing that this is all part and parcel of the same thing. Okay. This is about controlling women. You know, to say it's a war on women, that's not hyperbole. It is a war on women. It's trying to keep women in their place, trying to keep them controllable so that the status quo is not messed with. And, you know, I touched on this just a little while ago, but really, really think about this, because this is what I've been thinking about. Men have been fighting so hard. I mean, you can go back to the suffragists. I imagine women were fighting for equality maybe before then, I don't know, but that's like what we're taught in history, kind of first turn of, not the last century, from like 1848 on till 1920 when we finally got the vote, and we've still been fighting ever since. 60s women's liberation movement. fighting for equality, and the pushback of tradition, which is very hard to what's the word I'm trying to think of? Defend. It's very hard to defend keeping women subservient to men, unless you bring religion into it. Unless you decide there's a God in the sky that created, this is the first time a male gave birth to a female out of a part of his body. We're going to switch up the whole way things have been. So she was done that to serve him. And this, I think, is one of the biggest obstacles we have to overcome, because people are so enmeshed in their religious beliefs. If you try and discuss with them any kind of logic, I think that's why, as I've said many times, raised in the Catholic faith, was very, very enmeshed in Catholicism. They urge you to have blind faith.
Yeah.
And don't answer questions, because if you're blind, you can't see what's really going on, and you follow the line ahead of you, what everybody, your parents, grandparents, everybody told you is true, what society has been telling us is true. And it's the people that step out of the line and say, hold on a second, who's making these rules and why are we following them? And there's one more thing I'll say, and then I'll let you have your say. But obviously, I have a lot to say about this, because I find it so frustrating and actually heartbreaking, especially that so many women adhere to these beliefs that really have no basis in fact. We've talked about this a lot, Siri. People hold up the Bible, which was thrown together because Constantine was losing his grip on power. He was a pagan. Christianity was rising. So he threw together this Bible. I'm not saying there's not beautiful things in the Bible. I'm not saying some of it is true, but it was cherry picked to serve the purpose of someone who wanted to be in power. And I do believe that continues and continues to this day. How you can justify the kind of hatred and abuse and stifling of people's voices by saying there's a God in the sky that wants this, it defies logic. And it really does take being blind to any kind of investigation of, well, where did this belief come from? And does it ring true? Because I can speak for myself, and anyone who's had a near-death experience that has gone to the other side. I didn't have near-death, but I had a Kundalini awakening twice. And the God that they're using to control us doesn't exist. Nobody's seen that God who wants you to get vengeance on this person and has all these rules. And when you get up there, he stands at the gate and says, you did this, I saw it, you're going to hell. This is all the fallacy of people that so long ago decided to keep people afraid, and you can control them. And if you can control them, you can get their money, you can get their power, and you can have it all for yourself. I'm not saying everybody involved in religion these days is even aware of this. There are some that are very consciously trying to keep the status quo, because it keeps the followers of religions believing that sacrifice, suffering, and poverty is holy to the God in the sky, and they'll be rewarded in heaven, while the people preaching this live in mansions and have private planes and are living very well off of people's sacrifices to this God that, I'm sorry, does not exist. I've never run into it. People have had near-death experiences. Don't run into this judgmental, angry God who's applauding your willingness to take away other people's rights and autonomy over their own bodies and choosing who they want to love and who they want to have sex with. That's man-made stuff. It's man-made stuff. The source of whatever it is that created us, that I've encountered, was love beyond belief. You can't even describe it. You can't even describe it. And all that stuff was ridiculous. That's all made up. So, all right, I'll take a breather. Siri, go for it.
Yeah, and I just want anyone who's watching this to just realize that for a lot of women who've taken the time to really own their own life and to take the time to free themselves from constraints, it is a process of being really angry and overwhelmed by the control that you see more and more and more of. And so like if you're watching this and you see a lot of energy and passion in what Mary's saying, or if I seem to get really, I can get very demonstrative and emotional when talking about what religion has done to women. It's real and it's coming from somewhere. My yoga teacher says something beautiful. She goes, when you encounter the divine feminine, you either fall madly in love with her or you're terrified and then you try to control her. And there's this, and what I mean by divine feminine is this: there aren't two gods in the sky. There's not a masculine, there's not a feminine. There is just source. There is just God. And yet God has all of the qualities that we might attribute to masculine and all the qualities that are feminine. God is whole, and our souls really are too. And yet God comes to us in many different ways. And so the divine feminine and all those beautiful aspects in which God might show up to us have been completely cast away from so many people's vocabulary, to the point where they think it's blasphemous if you talk about God in a feminine way. And even in Hindu religion, which has such a beautiful pantheon of feminine goddesses, a lot of those stories have been tamed down a little bit from their original power. But they still at least have, with Kali and Durga and Saraswati and all of these beautiful goddesses, these amazing stories that this is the face of God in a particular role. And you can't take that away. She is not subservient to the male god. And these are all, like, you can take them literally or not. That's not the point. The point is they're aspects of the source, the living God that people have encountered, and they are uncontrollable. You cannot control. In fact, so many of the stories about the goddesses are of asuras, like the demon. Even if you don't think they're demons, they're the unconscious part of us that try to control, that try to take, that try to own these women, and it never works out for them, ever. Because these women have their own power that is always underestimated. So as far as what's going on in our culture, we have experienced for a very, very long time in human history, sort of this shroud that's covered all cultures and all religions. It's permeated everything of patriarchy. And it sort of universally came around the planet around the same time and sort of infected everything. And we actually have evidence, like you said, before that time, when there was a lot more worship of the goddess, when women were revered and seen as portals into looking at the sacred and their power of their sexuality and their creation and who they were as housing the goddess, as faces of the goddess, was genuinely revered. And there was a massive shift that happened. And now we're starting to see a shift as more and more women are waking up and realizing what a lie this is. And with this, we've had women and men who've had experiences. You talked about near-death experiences, but there's mystics of every religion who've had powerful experiences of meeting God. And you're right, none of them come back and say, hey, God's going to throw us into hell in a handbasket. None of them say, God is a dude with a penis. None of them say men are dominant and women are. It's like they realize that so much of our culture and religion is made up, and often it's made up to serve so that we have something to live in every day. It's like training wheels on the bike. It gets us from one place to another, but it isn't the end game. It's not the end thing. Even religion itself, when you're young, you go to Bible school or whatever religion you are, you learn the basic things. You learn what other people think. You learn what other people believe. And that's appropriate for a while until you take over the reins of your own life. And unfortunately, what's happened is there's been such constriction for so long that it hasn't allowed people to take the reins over on their own life, especially women. And so now that more and more women are waking up to the fact that my soul is equal to a man's soul. In fact, our souls aren't even gendered, just our bodies are. Gender's a construct as well. These dumb conversations we're having about masculinity and femininity is just made up, and it gets so ridiculous. I just shared this thing with my friend recently. It was like, it's meant to be sarcastic, but it's like, do you take out your penne pasta one at a time from boiling water, or do you use a clampers like a weak man? You know, it's just, it's ridiculous when you start seeing the criticism that, like, okay, men apparently aren't supposed to have feelings. They can't wear color. They can't walk a certain way. They can't like tea. You know, it gets ridiculous when you think about the constraints that are put on both men and women when we start going down this, and it's all made up. And the last thing I'll say about this is, like, maturity. Maturity is when you've learned the rules, is when you've listened and you've received the information, and then you digest and integrate it, and you claim it for yourself, and you become responsible for your own self, and you act with wisdom and maturity and courage and all of that good stuff. And therefore you decide for yourself, and you decide in a way that has integrity. And in that moment, no one can tell you what is right for you. Nobody can do that, because that's control. There's guidance, and then there's control. And as we mature and grow, no one can, and I can only say what works for me. I can say what works in my household, that both my husband and I are happy with what we've decided to do. But that doesn't mean I'm going to tell everybody else that that works for everybody else. That would be ridiculous and immature of me to assume that, given the life I have with the privileges that I have, that my way and how it's worked out for me is somehow a universal template. That is just immature, childish thought. And so, yes, if we have a husband that is very career minded and the wife has the ability to stay home and they're both happy with that, go for it in a big way. But at the same time, there are women who are very career minded and men who'd want to stay home. There are both who would want to be career minded. Like, you, people are different. They're made different, and God gave them their desires. God gave us who we are. And to deny them simply because of where you're born or what body you're born into is immature and completely short-sighted. Yeah, I'll stop there.
No, I think you hit on several good points, and I do want to say I always find it amusing because you and I tend to do this a lot, which is explain our anger or passion or whatever, and almost apologize for it and make sure everyone knows we don't hate men and all that. There are so many men who have unapologetic shows that are so female bashing, especially if you're a feminist. Feminist is someone who believes both genders should be treated equally.
That's it.
We're applicable. I mean, you know, people, anyway, I won't get into that, but they never feel like they have to, they just rip at women. And I can speak of one in particular who's now passed away, who coined the term feminazis, never felt compelled to say, I don't mean all you women. And we know there's a lot of good women out there. Never, but women, we do it. I see other women do it too. Besides us, it's like, we got to make sure that people know we're not like man bashing or whatever, because if you're pro women in people's head, that means you're anti men. I am not. I am pro women healing themselves, becoming as powerful and free as they desire to be. And that's the thing with trad wives. I am not at all saying it's a bad thing. If you can do it, good for you. You know, I had my first baby 9 months after my senior prom, really, not even after I graduated. I got pregnant at my prom, had a baby by myself at 19 years old. I had to raise him. And I can still remember dropping him at the babysitter's, you know, and him being at that window, just crying, you know, he could barely stand. He's so tiny. And it killed me. And I thought, oh, I'm never doing this again. if I have any children, whatever I have to do, I'm going to be home with those children. That was my choice, not because of religion or anything else. And if you can do that, fine. But if you also can afford, if you have a husband, I mean, that guy's a professional football player. He makes millions. I'm sure his wife has a lovely life with nannies or house cleaners and isn't stressed about if the car breaks down. What are we going to do? We're not going to be able to pay the orthodontist this month. There's a lot of factors in there. But if that works for you, good for you. I applaud you. And it's the same thing with there was another point that I wanted to make. Sorry, I have like pages and pages of notes because I can get off on so many different roads on this. But here's what I wanted to say, because when I said that there's a method behind this, and I have nephews who I'm just in awe of them. They're so beautiful. There's definitely been an evolution in fathering in some quarters. There's some people that still want that dad on a pedestal. He works, comes home, and rules the roost. But I can see it. I can see that there's been a lot of really positive changes in the softening of men's hearts. Plus, it's so much better for them. What an awful way they have to live, to constantly keep a steel wall around your heart and not show emotion. And it's so messed up. But anyway, so here was the thing that I was thinking about with this, because I do think, why are men so adamant that women need to stay in the house? Well, because they don't want to be there mostly. That's a big reason, because it's way different. Men go to work and they do their job. God bless them. That when they support their family, and I'm sure they take great pride in that, and that's wonderful. But women, man, we're spinning 20 plates at once. There's a lot going on at home, and when you got a child who's throwing a fit all day, stressful. I mean, when they're newborns, oh my God, they're crying that never stops, where you feel like you're just going to lose your mind because you don't have sleep. There's a lot to it. But anyway, so these were the 2 points that I wrote down. So this kind of like this keeping women in their place, it keeps them from living their full potential, which is true. But if they're given equal voice in our society functions, things would drastically change for males, especially the ones in charge. And here's the couple of things that I really thought of. So we know if you're out somewhere and you see this gorgeous young 20-something girl with an old man, maybe bald, maybe overweight, could be her grandfather, let alone her father, what do you say in your head? You go, that guy's got some money, right? So that's how these old men, who in a million years could not get a young girl to be in a relationship with them or date them or whatever, they get to be sugar daddies, which that term is like, you could vomit on your own feet, but that's what they want. They want a girl child they can control and have sex with. So if women are given equality, we still don't have equality equally. The ERA has not passed since it was introduced in the late 60s, early 70s, because if we have financial equality, these rich old men aren't going to be able to get these hot young girls to be their playthings, because they're going to be making their own money, and they're going to be like, what do I want with an old man? When I'm an old lady, I'll have an old man, but I'm a young girl now. I want a young man, right? So that's one thing. And the other thing is abusive situations. I've known so many, you probably have too, women who are stuck in abusive situations because they have no financial means to get out and support themselves. And if you ever say, well, she should just leave, I don't care, I'd sleep on the street before I let someone beat me, I hope you never say that again. Because any woman who's in a situation with children to take care of, especially if she's got children to take care of, it's not that easy. And if you say things like that, you're incredibly ignorant about what's really happening in this world. But those men, you think they don't know, where's she gonna go? She can't afford to live without me. So the abuse continues and continues. And oddly enough, those type of men are the men who support politicians who promote this lifestyle that I really feel bad using the word Christian, because it's so unfair to the Christ that name was founded on, because it's so unlike what he came to preach. You've said this over and over. Siri, I love talking to Siri because she's very theologically educated. She can pull up those things. And you have said over and over, one of the reasons that they really hated Jesus was because he treated women equally. And there is plenty of evidence that Mary Magdalene was his wife and his co-leader of whatever this movement was. And she was given as much responsibility as any man would have been given. And he revered her and treated her that way. The people who want to keep this gravy train for the few up here going don't want people to know those kind of things.
Yeah, I think what you said earlier really struck something in me, that if you have something to lose, mainly that you're all of a sudden get consequences for your actions that have gone unnoticed because of male privilege. Those are the people who are often against women being liberated and women waking up to their own power. If at this point it's the good old boys club and that works really well for you, and you understand that all of a sudden you're not going to get the job and the privilege and the red carpet laid out in front of you and the ability to beat your wife and all your buddies on the force aren't going to do anything about it, yeah, you're gonna lose something in a big way. But I know so many men who are feminists in their heart, and they want the world to change because they don't have anything to lose. They only have gaining when they're allowed to express their feelings, when it's not seen as emasculating to go to therapy and to unwind the wounds that have been in their heart, when they feel the freedom of being able to choose their career in life and how much they want to be at home just as their wife is doing it, when they all of a sudden have the joy of being able to be the one that their kids run to when they hurt their knee. Like, there are beautiful, tender men who are opening up to the full expression of what it means to be human, just as women are. And for those men, they're just as excited about a new future, knowing that then we might actually get to a point in which people's lives can unfold in their own choosing, and that it really is more merit-based, which is absolutely not the case right now. So it really is the people who I believe are holding so tightly on this are those that have something to lose. They have the skeletons in the closet, and they know that they will not get the job because they can't just, throw their male privilege around or whatever. They'll actually have to prove that they're worth it. But also, I think for like the women and other people like this who are part of it, we've talked about this so many times, that it feels good and holy when you've been convinced long enough that your pain and your suffering and your stiff chin and your bottling up of your own desires is a holy thing. Then there's a part of you that feels really good about that, and you defend that. And we all do it to some extent. It's one way to justify our own pain and suffering is to see it as being holy. And so if you're a traditional wife and that works for you, you could just be ignorant and assume that other people have the privilege and the desire to do that. Or it could be that deep inside you feel stifled, and yet it feels like what you're doing is holy suffering. And so in the wake of not being able to choose your own life, you're going to feel very good about the fact that you are putting yourself on the back burner for the sake of God and your husband and your kids. And that's sad to me because it doesn't have to be that way. There's just there's also this lie that conservatives think often, because they're so used to seeing things in black and white, that if women truly get freedom and truly get all the education they need, and that if people can be gay and they can be straight and they can be trans, that the world is just going to go to hell in a handbasket and there won't be any like guiding light anymore. And it's not true. It's not true. I know about like bisexual, trans, I know about all these things, but I am still a very straight person, and I will always have been. Just because it's available to you doesn't mean you do it. I know that drugs exist, but you don't see me buying cocaine on the side of the street because I don't want it. I don't need it, right? Like when we tend to people's souls and when people feel loved and nurtured and taken care of, and when they're given education and guidance and freedom and support, we're going to have a society that figures out how to support each other and that figures things out. And yes, it may look a little bit different than how it does now, but it's going to be a whole lot less people crying in the corner all by themselves, depressed and trying to find medication to medicate themselves because the life they're living is so unbearable.
You said a mouthful there. You know, I want to share something. I don't know if I've shared this before, but the need for spiritual superiority
Yeah.
is really strong in religious circles. And I say this as someone who was oblivious to my own need to feel spiritually superior when I was very much enmeshed in my religion. And what I mean by that is we acknowledge, I know what God wants. I know I have the pipeline to God, and it's my duty to tell everyone else to believe what I believe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That comes from nothing except the people in charge of these religious organizations that want you in their fold because it keeps their organization going. It keeps money in their coffers. So I think that's a huge part. And what you said about sacrifice and suffering, I think one of the hardest things I had to do was let go of the sorrow and regret I felt once I realized all the sacrifice and suffering that I had done throughout my life was based on a false premise that there was some God in the sky that was going to reward me for all that sacrifice and suffering. And when I actually started awakening to the truth of what the divine is, God, if you want to call it God, whatever it is, this source of all, that took no delight in watching me sacrifice myself, that I didn't get a special place in heaven because I was so willing to suffer and sacrifice, that it was false programming and a kind of twisted spiritual pride that I could take this suffering. I could suffer more than anyone, and I'm going to be the most special to this God in the sky. And when I get there, he's going to be like, you holy little thing. Look at all you sacrificed and gave up. Mm-hmm. And so in the evolution of my belief system, and again, if it's not yours, that's okay. Just don't try and make me believe what you believe. I have no desire to make you believe what I believe. Yeah. Leave everybody alone. Let everybody find their own way. Inspiration, not instruction. Mm-hmm. But it was the hardest, and I still get twinges of it sometimes. Like, why didn't I realize this 30, 40 years ago, before I spent my lifetime being the victim, being the long-suffering victim who thought she was being holy by taking on all this suffering like Jesus. And I'm sorry that seemed mocking because I kind of was, because part of me is probably still a little pissed at those teachings that train us that we're somehow special. But I can tell you what I have learned that you will never be able to move me on, and that is love is the most powerful force on this earth. And I mean love, 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 unconditional love, of people that don't believe what you believe, of people that are following their own path, of lost souls, whatever it is. Love heals. Hatred and division, you will never convince me that comes from any kind of spiritual being. Anyone who's preaching hatred and division to me is someone who has completely lost their way. Mm-hmm. That is, and they hide behind some kind of God. Stop it. Have the guts to say, this is my racism and my sexism, and this is how I think the world should be. Stop hiding behind a made-up God. Own your crap. If that's how you feel, don't hide behind a God in the sky that doesn't exist. You want to be racist and sexist and homophobic? Own it. But don't blame this God you've made up, because you're using religion to justify your sexism, and you're using patriotism to justify your racism. That's it. There's no God in the sky that's applauding you. And I hope, if you're younger than me, you wake up long before I did and realize there's no God in the sky asking you to sacrifice, suffer, or judge. I don't know how the hell people who believe in Jesus and say they follow his teachings kind of miss the part that he said over and over and over, which is don't judge others. You're on your own path, take care of your own house. Don't throw stones when there's a, what is it, or a speck in your eye, and I don't know, you
Yeah.
Basically, he said don't judge more than he said anything else. But the judgment is what today's Christians, and I use that term loosely because it doesn't have anything to do with the Christ that I believe in. They use judgment more than anything else, it seems to me.
Yeah, and one thing I'll just say is we've talked before, I think, about young souls and old souls, and you know, there isn't a tradition in Christianity that in order to be a leader, you need to go off in the wilderness and face your shadows and, you know, face your inner demons, do your work. That sort of deep spiritual reflection is not the norm of being asked for religious leaders. And at least in my tradition, it's a very intellectual learning. So you get A's on your papers, you read all the books, and you can regurgitate and formulate the right theologies and Bible exegesis, and that's not bad. But that is a very masculine understanding of learning, whereas the feminine understanding of learning would be then to deeply connect with your shadow, with your intuition, with what's going on deep inside, because that is what creates maturity. When you're able to face yourself, when you're able to go in and meet those parts of yourself with love and grace, that's what fosters maturity and wisdom. And the wisest people on the planet are the ones who've done that. They're the ones that have done that inner work in a serious way. And they're the true leaders. They're the ones that come humbly and say, well, I don't know a whole lot, but you know, I'll offer you what I have, take it or leave it. That's a green flag right there. And just to wrap up kind of what we're saying a little bit, there's this beautiful word that I'm in yoga teacher training and being really impressed by some of the beauty of what I'm learning. There's this beautiful word called dharma, which is like your work in the world. It's teaching, but it's also what's your work to do in the world. And you're the only one who can figure that out. Nobody can tell you what your purpose is, what your mission is. Nobody can tell you. It's yours to figure out, and it's yours to embody, because that's between you and God. You're here to learn for a reason, and God created you specifically with your traits and your this and your that and everything as a vehicle in which to learn. And you're the only one who knows what lessons you have to learn and what you have to figure out. And so anyone who tries to tell you that they know what you should be doing and what your work is in this world simply because of your gender is a very immature person who has not really looked hard at life or anything. They've just sort of bought hook, line, and sinker into the black and white of the cultural religious world. And we've all been there. I mean, when we're little and we grow up, we accept the rules of the house, right? We accept the rules of the culture. And that's part of growing up. You're born into a culture, and that's the world you live in. And if you're in France, you speak French. And then at some point, hopefully, if it starts to not work for you anymore, you start to ask questions. And that is a holy questioning. That is a holy breaking apart of what you thought you knew. And I believe God is in that process very much.
I love that. Thank you so much. I want to emphasize once again that without question, I believe the most powerful force on this planet is love. Mm-hmm. And if what you're doing is following rules someone told you to follow in order to be a holy person or a good person, and love is not in the equation, and the person that you're focusing on is not feeling love, then I'm sorry, I can never get behind you saying that this is some kind of holy or sacred path you're on. The path you're on has you hating other people, judging other people, causing division between people. That's no God I've ever experienced. It's a God that I was taught existed, and through my own personal spiritual journey, amazing, miraculous encounters. That's a made-up God. That God does not exist. And the last thing I do want to say, I've mentioned this a couple times. I struggle a lot. Obviously, I get passionate. I like that word. I'm passionate. I'm not angry. I'm passionate. But oh, I lost my train of thought again. Passion. Oh, so and every once in a while I still find myself, not as much as before, but seeing these kind of things, especially in American politics with this hateful rhetoric. And then I would feel myself getting angry and hating them. Like, I don't want that hatred and anger in the world. I hate them. They're making me angry. It's like, it's so ridiculous. You're kind of putting more in, but what do you do with it? What do you do? And what I have found is, I shared this before, is I just got the message. They're in a lot of pain. These people have all these hateful signs all over their houses, cars, everything. They're like this. They're in a lot of pain. And that's how we're taught to deal with our pain in this society, for sure. I think the world in general we turn it into anger, because then it's not scary. Our vulnerable feelings are scary. Anger's not. Makes us feel powerful. So we bury the fear under anger and just kind of roar at everybody. And Lisa Greenfield was on the show a couple weeks ago, and she spoke about even these leaders, that you see saying these hateful things. And it's not love and light. That's hard, but I really encourage you to go back. She said very clearly about how to see this cord attached from them into the center core of the earth of love, and see the darkness kind of draining out of them or whatever. It was really good. So it's Lisa Greenfield on that show. She talked about that, but there are things we can do. I think it's important. For me, it is important to talk about. I always say I may feel differently a year from now, but saying just, if you're spiritual, let's only focus on light and ignore all this stuff. And to me, it feels like a betrayal to our sisters of color and immigrants. And it's like, I think it's the privilege of the white woman to say, we're just going to focus on love and light and pretend those things aren't happening.
Yeah.
So that doesn't feel comfortable for me at this stage in my journey. But, if that's where you're at, also no judgment. How about we all just let each other believe what we believe, stay out of each other's business, stop judging, and focus on love. Love ourselves. The more you love yourself, the less you're going to find yourself judging other people. So with that, we'll close. Siri, please tell people where they can find out more about you.
Yeah, you can look at my YouTube channel, which is Siri Strommen, or you can go to siristrommen.com on my website and find me there too.
All right, Siri Strommen, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.